Welcome to this episode of Intellectual Conservatism. Today, I'm here with my good friend, Olivia Rogers. So in case you guys haven't or couldn't tell from the thumbnail already, this is the person who invited me to my very first Mass. I'd gone to like Mass kind of before in the past, although, it's more like I went in and out, right? And I didn't actually go in and participate or really try to immerse myself. But when Olivia invited me, I guess I was just saying to myself, okay, like maybe I should take this seriously, right? And sit down and really think about it. And so, Olivia, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having
And
me.
yeah, of course. So let me just start off by having you introduce yourself, right? Tell us what you're doing right now, where you're studying and all that.
Yeah, so I'm Olivia. I'm currently going into my third year of law school at Notre Dame, and I'm back in Kansas City, my hometown, for the summer.
Nice. It's just nice and straight to the point, Olivia. That's how I remember you. So I think Olivia, you and I met. I think it was in high school through a mutual friend, and it's funny because like from there, like I never really thought that. I just thought like, oh, Olivia's going to be this cool person, right? And I never realized that you were going to play such a huge part in my life. And so I know I've told you this multiple times, but thank you so much for inviting me. And we're going to get into more of the details later, but I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, it's all the Holy Spirit, and I'm glad it worked out as it did.
So Olivia, here's my first question. Just talk about your faith journey, right? I want to kind of learn more about Olivia the Catholic. What is that like?
Yeah, wow, Olivia the Catholic. So great question. I'm a cradle Catholic, and raised in a family that's Catholic on both sides of my extended family. My mom was raised Catholic. My dad's a convert, and then the rest of his family sort of converted after he did. And so I grew up having all my cousins, aunts and uncles and grandparents go to Mass together and celebrate sacraments together. My uncle and aunt are my godparents, and that's true. We're just a big, happy Catholic family for the most part. And, I'm very blessed to have grown up in that. I often say that I think if I hadn't been raised Catholic, I think I'm a contrary enough person that it would have been much harder for me to come back to the church. Not that I wouldn't have. I have complete faith that God would have led me on a path back to him, but it's just a blessing every day to know that that's so much a part of who I am, not only what I believe now, but that it's just ingrained into my upbringing. But yeah, after I was raised homeschooled, and so we just sort of lived life in a very integrated way. My education and my faith and my family was never really separate, and which was another huge blessing growing up. But once I reached high school and then into college, my faith started to become more my own, as I think it does for everyone as they begin to become an adult. But in high school, I was surrounded by mostly Protestants. I had only one Catholic friend just because of the circles I was in. And that was definitely a time of testing my faith. I was in many debates with Protestants. I learned a lot about the differences in theology between Catholics and different various denominations of Protestants. And I was exposed to a lot of different ways of being Christian. And over again, I was drawn to a lot of things at my friends' churches, like the music or the community or the way that they prayed, but it always felt like something was missing at whatever service I was at or whatever group gathering I was at. And as I kind of went deeper in my faith, it became clear that what was missing was the Eucharist, and the source and summit at every gathering. And so once I got to college, that's really where I think I started to dive into my faith on my own. And at the time, my family was also kind of going through a deeper conversion as well in various ways, which we can talk about at some point if you want. But in college, we both attended Kansas State University, and which was, I think, probably for both of us, definitely for me, not my initial plan for college. I was expecting to go to where all of my friends were going, all of my speech and debate homeschooled friends were going to small Christian or Catholic colleges, very small, great schools. And I had applied to all of those schools. I had gotten in. I even had a roommate set up at one of the schools. Like I was going to a small Christian private school. But as a backup, I had looked at K-State. I love Manhattan, and I had applied to it so I could go if I wanted. And just through a series of events, I felt like I should stay in Kansas. So most of the other schools would have taken me out of state, pretty far away from my family, pretty far away from home. And while I think that would have been fun, I just felt like it wasn't right. And so I ended up staying at K-State, which also felt not quite right at the beginning, but it became really clear really quickly that the thing that I legitimately least expected to happen at K-State actually was probably the reason I was there, just to grow deeper in my Catholic faith because of the community at K-State. And just through the community at St. Isidore's, I was able to go on a pilgrimage to Poland and grow in friendship with priests, which I hadn't been able to do before, and grow in friendship with amazing Catholic people around me and people who were converting, like yourself and several of my other friends, which was just an amazing experience to have as a young adult. And I miss it a lot. So now I'm, still Catholic, still a young adult, still trying to figure it out. But I think I've just been so blessed by those years at K-State, and that time to really, I think, was very transformative in a lot of ways that I never planned and never expected. And it's very clear that God's hand is in it all. So.
Yeah, I forgot that we had the speech and debate connection.
Yes.
Because when you mentioned like where your speech and debate friends were going, like you mentioned like small kind of private kind of liberal arts or Christian universities. For me, like my debate and forensic friends were going to like Harvard and Yale, and I was like trying to go on the Princeton train. And then when I got rejected, I was also kind of at K-State, like, what am I doing here? Yep. And I just kind of appreciated how you mentioned that, because in a lot of ways, like, I guess, you being there, if you weren't there, then who knows, like maybe I would have found the church another way, but certainly I would not have gotten that mass invitation after class that one day. So, I mean, I really appreciate just hearing your story. So speaking of that class, what do you remember about it? Or could you just talk a little bit about, what were your big takeaways from that class?
Sure. I was trying to remember. Do you remember the exact name of the class? It was, what was it?
It was Medieval Political and Social Thought.
That's right. That's right. Yes. With our favorite Dr. Johnson. That was, I think, another way that K-State surprised me, and that it was clear that God's hand was in it all, is that Dr. Johnson was at K-State, and that she was as invested in, sort of learning from primary texts and from sources like we were reading in that class, which was very different from a lot of the other professors. And so I knew I wanted to take that class. I had signed up for it, and it was sort of in the middle of what I like to call my great transformation in political theory, which is not that huge. It's not like I went from it's not like the jump from atheism to Christianity. Like, it wasn't quite like that, but it was definitely a transformation from sort of a more libertarian, hands-off government vision of things to understanding where we've come from, and sort of the very valuable ancient and medieval thought that the Enlightenment tends to obscure in our modern age. So I remember reading a lot of fun things in that class, like Machiavelli and Augustine and Aquinas, and Charles Taylor, and being exposed to thinkers who were in many ways much more in line with what I believe. They were Catholic, or they were, they had a vision of human flourishing that I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me, in a way that maybe post-Enlightenment and Enlightenment thinkers didn't have. They had a very individualized way of looking at things. And so once I realized that, it made me question, what is their vision of a government? What is their vision of a good polity? And why am I not aligning with that? So I remember thinking it was a really great class, and it very much challenged me. And I think we had great discussions in it. It was a really fun class, and we sat right next to each other, and yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I think it's because like you're one of like the familiar faces in the class, and so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna sit next to Olivia. And then also, given the controversial topics we discussed, in ethics, it's like, okay, a fellow conservative, I know I can trust Olivia. So it was nice to be next to you. Do you remember what your final paper was about that you gave your brief presentation on?
I can't remember now. Was it Do you remember?
I think, okay, I think yours was maybe Aristotle and education or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah, I think you're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember what yours was on?
Yeah, mine was about like the concept of human dignity, especially with
Yeah.
respect to like the infanticide debate.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
Look at us, hard-hitting topics.
Yeah, well, I don't want to make it sound like, one day you just saw me and there was a halo above my head and you knew you had to ask me to mass. But what inspired you, right, to invite me? Because
Yeah.
from what I recall, or from what I know about you, Olivia, I know that you've also
Mhm.
invited other people, right? So maybe this is kind
Mhm.
of a habitual thing where you're just like, oh, maybe I'll just be innocently enough asking these people to come to mass, right? So, I mean, what inspired you? Do you remember when that happened? Like the day? I
Mhm.
mean, yeah. What do you remember?
Yeah. So I remember that I can't remember exactly how I knew that you were, I think maybe you had said something to me like, oh, I'm sort of thinking about, I'm just interested in Catholicism, like I'm intrigued by it. And I was like, wow, okay. I didn't expect that. But once I knew that, I think I was like, well, I went to mass pretty regularly at St. Izzy's during the week and definitely on Sundays. And so I was like, well, why don't you just come along? And I was pretty confident that if you came to mass, anyone who came to St. Izzy's mass was going to enjoy it because the priests were great and it was a beautiful mass and as all masses are, but St. Isidore's was had a very particular community and great feel to it. And so I just remember thinking, well, why not? And it was probably the prompting of the Holy Spirit to be like, well, just come to mass. Just come along. I'll be there at this time. And
Mhm.
I felt like a terrible host when it actually came time for the mass that you came to, because I remember I was looking around trying to find you and I was like, where is Swan? Where is he? Maybe he
Mhm.
didn't show up. And then I realized you were in the back or on the other
Very
side or
back, yeah.
something.
Mhm.
And then you kind of ran out afterward and I was like, oh my gosh, I ruined it all. I should have been a better host at mass. But thankfully that the Holy Spirit took over and it wasn't on me to do that from there. But
Yeah, I think
when
we messaged each other afterwards, and I just said,
Mhm.
"Yeah, I just had a great time," and I kept on
Mhm.
coming every Sunday to mass, and I
Yeah.
think I finally was able to like sit next to you. And there was another guy. I mean, I don't know if I have his permission to say his name, but I remember like we were praying the Our Father, right? And see, I'm used to like saying the whole thing all at once, right? But then
Mhm.
as Catholics, we stop for a little bit, and then we
Mhm.
say, the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, down forever, right? And I
Mhm.
remember like I spoke during that portion. I looked over and he's like, ah, so you're Protestant too. I don't know why, but anyway, so
uh,
yeah, I just remember from the very beginning, I was just so happy that you invited me. And um, you know, throughout your life, Olivia, have you had any thoughts about, I don't know, like Latin Mass or Novus Ordo? Did you ever get into that controversy, or was it never really like crossing your radar?
I didn't even know the controversy existed until I think until I went to law school, because I
Hmm.
feel like once you get into a community that's basically centered around Catholicism, then it's like then the debates come out because everyone has their viewpoint, versus if it's like, well, you're the only church in town or you're the only church on campus, there's not as much of a field for controversy because it's sort of like, well, we just all got to band together, and do this. Um, which of course St. Isidore's is not the only church in Manhattan, but it is the only church, it's the primary center on campus. And so I never knew that there was a debate. And I don't think I've ever actually attended a normal Latin mass. I unknowingly went to an SSPX mass
Hmm.
before I didn't really know what it was. And then I learned about it after the fact, which it's still very similar to the actual Latin mass, but no, I have not gotten into the controversy.
I want to mention one last thing about this kind of episode before we go on to just the last few questions. But
Sure.
or actually, I think what I told you was I'm not sure if I want to be Protestant anymore. I think that's
Mm.
what I said.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
learned that day about how the Reformation led to secularism. And so I was
Yeah.
just like, I want to learn like how the Catholic, because we were talking about like the Catholic view of time and how the
Mhm.
sacrament makes something that was previously in the past now immediately present. And so those were the things that attracted me. But do you remember when you recommended that I talk to Andy Brandt?
I do, yes.
Oh, and for the audience, Andy Brandt eventually became my confirmation sponsor, and I think Olivia, he's our favorite communist. No, yeah, we joke that he's like very much about workers' rights and that sort of thing, and so we just joke, you know. He
Yes,
derides
yes,
he derides Olivia and I for being more conservative in a healthy, fun way, and he's very much
yes,
orthodox when it comes to Catholic doctrine and such. But anyway,
definitely. Yes, no, I remember I think we had started getting into some discussions, and I was like quickly blown out of the water with my theological knowledge, which this is again the pro and con of being a cradle Catholic, is that there's a lot of things that I sort of just like I have learned over time, but at first you just take it on faith. You're just like, well, I believe that the church is the true church, so that's all I need to know to some extent. And then I learn over time the questions that many converts ask at the very beginning and throughout the time of becoming Catholic as well. But quickly I was like, oh gosh, I don't know the answers to all these questions. And I knew you were going to have hard questions. And so I was like, I'm just going to pass them off to Andy, because Andy would probably know the answers or would at least know how to think about it, since he'd recently been through that process as well. And I knew Andy was a good thinker, and we always have had good discussions about theology and politics and all of the above. So yes, I enlisted some help.
and you played a part in his conversion, right? Is that correct, or am I misremembering that?
I knew Andy during his conversion, and we had gone to mass together quite a bit. And I mean, I always feel like I don't play a part at all. I'm just sort of there, and I go to church with people, and God does the rest, because I surely have not been the person to convince people of the faith, because I don't feel like I'm capable of that level of convincing. It's the Holy Spirit for sure. But yeah, I was there through the whole process, and was able to see that from having a conversation about Catholicism where Andy disagreed with me on many points, and me being like, well, don't know if this is ever going to happen, to seeing him confirmed. I was there through the whole part. So it was really amazing to see.
So Olivia, before I get to asking you about what you're studying in law school and just kind of discussing a little bit more your political thought, is there a Catholic prayer, devotion, or even like a dogma or a doctrine that really stands out to you? And maybe those can be two separate questions, but I know for me, like the doctrine of the incarnation, that to me has always stood out and helped me become Catholic. And my favorite devotion, I'm starting to grow with the rosary. I remember before I was just kind of like, oh, this is such an intense prayer. And then I liked like the Divine Mercy Chaplet, right? But the Jesus prayer is also really good. But anyway, Olivia, what is your kind of favorite devotion and doctrine?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to, there's so many, but I'll have to narrow it down. So I'll just give one that's like a more Jesus devotion, and one that's a more Mary devotion, because I have some favorites in both. But for the main devotion, I think Divine Mercy has always been one of my favorites. Our church here in my hometown is Divine Mercy. It used to be Sacred Heart, which is another one of my favorites, but it merged into a new parish, which is Divine Mercy. And then that's become even more significant to me after going to Poland, seeing the Divine Mercy image, and just, it's always the Sunday it's very close, usually very close to my birthday, because usually it's right after Easter. And so it's always just a great time. Just to reflect on God's mercy and the closeness of Jesus to us, I think. And I think that's the whole devotion. And just, I love JP2. I love a lot of the Polish saints, and they all played a role in sort of bringing divine mercy to the forefront in different ways. But as far as the Marian devotion, that is something, the rosary is something that I've really grown to love. That's part of what my family has gotten more into over the last 4 or 5 years. My mom was really the one who started going to some classes on Marian theology that were being hosted here in Johnson County with Holy Family School of Faith, and praying the rosary with Dr. Mike from Holy Family. And we, at first, I think our whole family was kind of like, okay, that's great, but like kind of whatever about it. And then we started praying over COVID pandemic time. We started praying a daily family rosary together. And it was just really transformative. Just a deepening of faith, I think, in a lot of small ways. But yeah, I love the rosary, a lot of devotion to Mary. And I think my favorite, I love a lot of Marian titles, but Our Lady of Guadalupe is one of my favorites. There's a great painting of her that's on one of the trees around the St. Joseph Lake at Notre Dame. And it's just, I always walk by it whenever I'm out on my walks, and it's just great. I love it. So yeah.
So yeah, Olivia, what are you studying at Notre Dame? I mean, obviously it's law, right? But
Yes.
is there a kind of law that you want to really focus on? And can you tell me why it's constitutional law, please? That's what I wanted to study. But anyway, what kind of law is it?
Yes, I do love constitutional law for sure. The great thing about law is that everybody gets a JD, a Juris Doctor. So you can come out with whatever, you can kind of dive into your special interest, but it doesn't necessarily tie you down to it at first. So you get to explore a lot of areas and then eventually choose one to specialize in. But I do love con law. I think I've really just loved every minute of law school. Notre Dame is fantastic for everyone out there. I feel like I should be getting paid for the amount of publicity I give Notre Dame, the pictures I take, the people I talk to about how great it is, but it has been a great experience. There's just something very special about being on a campus. It surely has its faults. The administration has their faults, but you can't deny that being on a campus with the sacraments so readily available, so many places to pray, chapels in every building. There's something very just very special about that. And the law school is no exception. It's great. And I've really loved diving into the law. I love the law, and definitely con law. I'm very interested in litigation in general. So anything where I'm in a courtroom or making arguments or writing briefs. I'm very interested in appellate work, which is basically just for all the non-legal people out there. I didn't know what that word meant before I went to law school, but it's just when you have a case, you appeal it, and it involves a lot more research and a lot more writing and a lot more just argument about the law itself. At that point, all the facts have been found, they're done. There's no more evidence that's being entered, and it's just, what's the law? What does it mean? And how does it apply here? And I love that. I think that's so fun. And would love to focus on that. So, and
you're the head of the Federalist Society at Notre Dame, is that correct? Or the law school?
This, yeah, for this next year, I'm the president of FedSoc. So pray for me with that. It'll be some work, but it'll be a great time.
And I guess the last question I want to ask you, Olivia, is, you talked about how you kind of went from more libertarian to maybe a more classical conservative vision. And so I just wanted to ask you to describe maybe what would Olivia's political philosophy be, or what would your, maybe, I don't know, this might be too big, but your republic, right, so to speak, your ideal society. What are some things that really shape your thinking, or people who have shaped your thinking?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think the older I get, I say this as if I'm like 50 years old. I'm not, but the older I get, the more I realize I don't know anything. I feel like, the Aristotle, at least the quote that's attributed to him, like the wise, what is it? True wisdom is knowing that you don't know anything, or whatever, the paraphrase version of that. Knowing what you don't know. And I feel like I feel that every year. So I feel like I don't know. I think I know what a good republic would be, but I also feel like Olivia being queen of the world might not be such a great thing. But I think I've definitely moved from a vision, a more libertarian vision. I think primarily not in the sense that I don't support a limited government, or, a lot of the things that libertarians support, I probably overlap on, but it's more, I think, of a vision shift of what are we as a society trying to achieve? What is our, our end and our aim that we have? And if that aim is human flourishing, and to create a society, or to sustain a society that allows everyone to flourish and to reach the good, and to be able to pursue the good, then there's lots of things that I absolutely still believe in that might overlap with libertarianism. I still believe in religious liberty. I still believe in, the ideal size of government that's not taking over. But I think I've shifted in that I don't think that an atomized or individualistic society is healthy. We aren't created to be just individuals creating our own destiny. We're created to be in community and to pursue the truth, which requires more than just, making our own rules. And ultimately that makes us more free and more alive than we would have been otherwise in this. It's just sort of an incomplete vision, I think. So it's not that I think all of that is wrong. It's just not quite the full picture of what our society could look like, or what we should be aiming for. So it's not there's a lot of abstract words there. And I think that's because it's very difficult to actually apply, especially in an age like ours where, there's a lot of things. If we could start all over and start from scratch, maybe, we'd build a kingdom like Aquinas wrote about, but even he was writing something that didn't exist in reality. And so it's a good reminder that, we're creating, we are creating only so we have so much power. We only have so much power, and we ultimately are made for a world that isn't in reality. It has to be redeemed, but we can do things to hopefully advance the good. And I'm hopeful that being a lawyer and the rule of law and, hopefully being, a key player in bringing about justice in cases will help to do that. So, yeah.
To put it in a nutshell, basically, you finally had a stronger, fuller conception of the common good, right?
Yeah.
It was no longer a nasty word, but actually something that had meaning given,
Right.
Our Catholic worldview and our understanding of the natural law. Well,
Right.
Olivia, thank you so much for coming on to my show. It is right now hailing and raining outside of my window, so I hope that nobody can really hear it. But Olivia, I appreciate you coming on to the show. And I feel like I say this so much, but I feel like I want to say it out of the depth of my heart. But I thank God every day for people like you and the way that you, even if it's like unintentional, or maybe like you don't do it fully, like knowing like, oh yeah, this person's definitely gonna become Catholic, but it's like those little things that you do. What is it? Mother Teresa talked about like the small acts of love, right? That build up. And so I think, Olivia, you're a great example of that. And so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and also the fact that you are a brilliant young woman who's also a very devout and faithful Catholic. And so, Olivia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Swan. Thanks for being such an inspiration. And I'm just very thankful to know you and to see where you're going to end up.